Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the government and political correspondent, and today I have a very familiar guest, Dean Knudson. Dean, welcome to the show.
Good to be back.
And for those who don't recognize Dean, it must mean that you haven't seen our previous shows because Dean's been our most frequent guest on the show. He is our current representative from the 30th Assembly District. And Dean has announced that he is not seeking re-election. So we thought this is a great time to get you in and talk. It's been probably about a year since you were last in, and you, I think, make generally an annual visit. So I really appreciate you being willing to come on, and so we can talk about your service and where you go from here. So I want to start with the last Assembly year, and some people bring us up to speed on how the sessions work, because you're elected on a 2-year cycle, and I know that there's 1 year where you're talking a lot about the budget and so forth because it's a 2-year budget, and then there's another year where you're not down in Madison quite as much.
Right.
So talk about this last term.
Right, so we have a 2-year term, senators have a 4-year term, and it's a 2-year budget cycle, sort of a 2-year legislative cycle. So senators get elected to 2 of those, and we get elected to 1. Elections are in the fall of the even year. Bulk of the legislative work happens in the odd year. That's when the new budget for the 2 years is put together. And then we also have a fall session that year. And then in the spring of the even year, there's a brief spring session, and so we've wrapped that up. I think, made a lot of progress. We're continuing to make our business climate more favorable to help us grow jobs in Wisconsin, and we're seeing progress. We're continuing to see job growth. In the rankings that are done by various national groups, our rankings have continued to climb, that we're a more favorable place to do business. And we've worked a lot in a bipartisan way to work towards job training, worker training, helping to have the skilled workforce that can fill the jobs that we've got. We've got a lot of jobs in Wisconsin. Manufacturing jobs have got skilled positions where they don't have people that have the skill set to fill the job. And unfortunately, what that can mean sometimes is then they may find it more attractive to leave the state. And that's the last thing we want to have happen. So we've got a big manufacturing base. So yeah, I decided not to run. I really enjoyed it. It's been a very exciting and fulfilling time. I did 3 terms, 6 years.
Okay, so I'll rearrange the agenda here. Let's talk about, because you mentioned about that you're stopping. So why are you stopping after? And I said before we went on camera, only 3 years or 3 terms. I think that the norm is usually longer, and so why are you stopping now after the 3 terms?
I just have a deeply held belief in a vision that our founding fathers had, that there ought to be what James Madison called rotation in office. That these shouldn't be careers, that you ought to go do your thing as a citizen legislator and then come back to the private sector and let someone else do the job. I mean, I served 3 terms on the city council back in the 90s, and that felt like enough. I decided not to run again. I could have been reelected if I'd chosen to, I'm pretty sure. Later came back and, I was encouraged to run for mayor, and so I did a couple of terms as mayor, and now I've done a few terms here in the state legislature.
So
it's an honor, it's a privilege, that your constituents and your supporters ask and encourage you to run, and then they work hard, spend their money to help support you, walk in parades, knock on doors, and in turn, I go and try to represent them and be their voice. And in western Wisconsin, it's pretty critical that we have a strong and effective voice down in Madison, because otherwise they have a tendency to forget about us. Exactly. I mean, they think of us as sort of part of Minnesota. And the other part to that that's really important is need to try to be a voice here to kind of tell and communicate what's been going on down in Madison. And because, again, we're fairly disconnected sometimes from what goes on just because we have, Twin Cities media is just one of the reasons. So it has been a great honor, but I feel good about the time. And I never made any term limit promise, although to close friends I would say, I think I would do this for 2 or 3 terms. That's what I thought at the outset. And when I got there, it felt like about the right thing. I'm ready to be private citizen dean again for a while.
So you started city council, and like you said, 3 terms, a couple terms as mayor, and then state assembly. So would the next step be state senate or Congress? Any desire there?
The state senate, if I had wanted to serve longer in the legislature, I could stay where I was. I had gotten to a point where I was influential within the Assembly caucus, a leadership position there, and serving on the Joint Finance Committee. So,
well, the Joint Finance Committee, that was pretty huge to get there in just less than 3 terms, and it allows you to exude some influence there.
And the Senate works on a seniority system that means that you would start, and it takes a while to achieve a level of influence in the Senate. That can be a reason that senators sometimes stay longer because it takes so long to get.
Well, 3 terms there, and then all of a sudden you're there 12 years. So.
But we had enough turnover within the assembly that I got to where, in my 3rd term, there were only about 9 or so, out of the 63 in the Republican side that had been there longer than I had because we had had a lot of turnover, which again I believe in. It's a good thing. If there's a downside to that is if you don't have people that are steeped in policy and develop some expertise in policy, then what will happen is the bureaucrats run the show completely. And this is what has happened in states like Michigan, where they have fixed term limits and it's 3 years and you're out. Everyone knows that, in their 2nd term, boy, they're going to try to get things done. And in the 3rd term, they're a complete lame duck and all the discussion is about what happens next. I felt like I was still effective in the 3rd term. I announced in January what my intentions were, which give plenty of time for a good process.
Aren't you going to miss
we'll send a good replacement?
Are you going to miss the lobbyists and the need for fundraising?
Well, fundraising is not my favorite thing. I don't know too many people that really love it.
Right.
It's a necessary part of politics because to communicate in our society, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, communication of ideas usually involves advertising, and that money goes almost entirely for advertising. So advertising is about marketing to a certain extent, but it's about communicating ideas. And there's nothing really wrong about money in politics. If the TV ads and the U.S. postal costs weren't as much, we wouldn't be raising as much money because that's where all the money goes. At the state level, it's television, and at the local level, it's doing mailings and things like that. No, it's no one's favorite.
So to go back to my question, percent chance that we'll see the Knudson name on the ballot again, say for Congress or something in the future?
I never would rule out what might happen in the future, but I have no plans to run for office, at all.
Okay.
I came from the grassroots, working as a grassroots Republican Party volunteer and then a party officer back in the 90s. Did that for years before I was ever a candidate.
Okay.
And I'll probably go back to doing that.
Okay. Before we talk about the future for Dean Knudson, let's look back at those 6 years as a whole then. First of all, okay, the last year or last session, we had a budget, the 2015 budget. There's a lot of talk about the freezing of the tuition, at the UW, and we hear how higher education is, the state system anyway, is feeling some pinch now, the after effects of that. But other than you know, the typical complaints that too much is being put into the budget bill that shouldn't be there and so forth. What else would you say was accomplished? I saw a couple very interesting bills, and you know, we get the governor up here to sign some of that stuff regarding drug abuse or child sex ring trafficking and so forth.
Right.
That's important stuff, but anything that has the level of what you saw maybe in the first couple of terms, like Act 10 and so forth.
So when I first ran, and I told my campaign committee we're going to reduce this down to 6 words: lower taxes, more jobs, better education. I think that we've had measurable progress in all of those areas. We've cut taxes significantly while balancing the budget and putting more money away into the rainy day fund, for example, than it's ever had before. So we've really gotten our fiscal house in order. Where we had this huge budget deficit, we fixed that problem. And we didn't do it by raising taxes. Over in Minnesota, what you're seeing is that they raise taxes, and now for a while you're going to see extra revenue. But over time, we know that that doesn't work very well, because that's exactly what had been done in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, every tax that could be raised was raised, except the sales tax. And even some taxes were increased back during the Doyle years. And then a recession hit, and guess what? Now you put yourself in a position where you're going to have businesses and jobs just flee. And so that's what happened. I think Minnesota is learning that lesson right now. Recently, what you've been seeing is our growth is exceeding theirs. Our numbers are looking better than theirs. And granted, they raise taxes and they're spending. Well, this is what liberals in government and bureaucrats love to do. I mean, they would do it every single time they could. Let's raise taxes and spend more. Let's raise taxes and spend more. Well, that's what they're doing in Minnesota. But in the long run, that hurts your economy, and it hurts the very people that you're helping, you want to help. And so, really. So we did that, lower taxes. We got more jobs, low unemployment, things are looking better, and better education. I mean, Act 10 led to putting school boards in charge. And what you're seeing is that they've made positive changes that are making positive impacts for our students. The students in the classroom are learning, and learning well in Wisconsin, and we're proud. Our test scores are good, our graduation's good. And we've got kids coming out, going to good colleges, getting good jobs, getting into the workforce. All that is happening well. Even referendums, and we've had a revenue limit law since 1993, very popular, help keep down property taxes finally, that I've always said really ought to be called a referendum limit law, because you can only spend so much no matter where it comes from without going to the voters to get permission to spend more. And what you've seen since Act 10 is the success rate for referendums of all kinds, passage of them, has gone way up, significantly up. It used to run about a 50-50 proposition. Lately, it's been running closer to 3/4 of them are passing. In fact, if yours doesn't pass, there was probably something wrong with it. Because if you make a reasonable approach to taxpayers now, they usually respond by saying, okay. And we know that the school board actually has control over things now. It's sort of like you've got a board of directors that actually has control, whereas before Act 10, there wasn't very much control. You could get elected to the school board and serve a 3-year term and never have a chance to make much of a difference, because the union contracts were fixed. They were only going one place, was up. And a lot of times, the renewal negotiation took so long. It might take 2 years just to do the negotiation, and they'd go without a contract and then give retroactive raises, and your term on the school board was done. And you couldn't make any difference in anything, because the system was just like a train going down the tracks that no one could steer it at all. Now there's control by local elected officials, and it's saved us $5 billion in the state and counting. That wasn't a one-time thing. It's ongoing, and people forget that bidding out the health insurance instead of buying from essentially a sole source, one health insurance provider, not only made sense the first year, but it makes sense year after year.
Or being able to have the flexibility to go to self-funding plan, like.
Exactly, self-funding. And you're seeing various school boards are really taking the flexibilities that come with Act 10 and starting to work with it. I mean, you've got, for example, up in New Richmond, where they're putting incentives in instead of having the pay increase come just from your time in service or whether you took some college credits. It didn't even matter whether the college credits had anything to do with teaching. We gave you more pay because you had taken more college. And now they're saying, look, master this area and we'll pay you more. Become more valuable to your students and we'll pay you more. And districts across Wisconsin now are looking at that and really getting creative.
Plus, we've had the flexibility of paying the good young teachers more faster and,
Right.
and gets rid of the.
And I think at the university system, I mean, we discovered they had a big surplus, huge surplus, that really had been sort of hidden. And over $1 billion sitting there. And we were just on the verge of giving a big raise in the budget before this current one, a big increase to the university. Governor had proposed significant increase, and then this came to light. And basically what we've said since then is a couple of things. One, we're not going to increase tuition. I mean, everyone talks about the cost of college and student indebtedness. Well, the biggest thing you can do is keep the cost of a college education affordable. And so for our in-state students, it's pretty unprecedented. We'll have had 4 years in a row with tuition flat. And you got to remember the baseline for that is it had gone up 6% a year after year after year after year. My daughter, when she went to UW-Madison, her first year compared to her fourth year, it had gone up 40% because the tuition had gone up and also the fees and things and everything had gone up. It's not just room and board, because by that time she was living off campus and so on. But there are student fees that go to pay for student government and this and that really aren't optional. If you're going to be enrolled there, you get to pay for those. And those were also going up at a rapid rate. So I think that's really significant. And then the most significant thing we did this session, and it caused quite a ruckus, but it's a completely reasonable thing. We joined the other 49 states in saying, look, our Board of Regents ought to be in control of what we have as far as tenure policy. And some people said we did away with tenure. Well, all we did was we took it out of state statute and we put it into the Board of Regents, the governing body of the university system, to craft a policy for when should there be tenure and when not. What it does is it's going to make for better education because you don't have rigid rules in state law. They're going to have the flexibility to make changes. And you couple that with the flexibility to pay differently, it's going to be a big improvement. So, I mean, I'm excited about education in Wisconsin. There's some pretty significant things that have been happening. It's only going to get better.
The other one some people would say, and it's been in the news recently, right to work.
Right to work, right.
That was another bill, and you want to explain that just a little bit.
Sure. So right to work is about employee freedom. You're a private sector employee that you can't be forced to join a union as a condition of your employment. And we became the 26th state in the union to enact a right to work law that says if you can get the job and you want to go there, you can work there. You don't have to join a union and pay union dues if you don't choose to. Now, that doesn't mean that unions are going away.
But it doesn't mean that they're going to be increased anytime too soon if people can get a job and then not have to join the union and you get the benefits that the union negotiates.
It's kind of there's a little bit of a misunderstanding of that, though. I mean, you can go to right to work states, and they aren't very far away from us. North Dakota, for example, Iowa, Michigan. became the 25th right-to-work state, a year or two before we did. And you go to those states and you see that there's still unions, and the unions still are playing their role. But now the union has to make a case to the worker for what they can do for the worker. So it makes it more of a worker-centered thing rather than a captive audience. And everyone would like to have a captive audience, and now you have to earn that. And so, and what we've seen is job growth in right-to-work states has just far outpaced that in the forced unionization states. And so I believed in that for 20 plus years, probably since I first started paying attention to it. Never really thought it would happen in Wisconsin. Even coming into this session, where I wanted to see it happen, but I didn't really think it would. One of the interesting things was we did that without the leadership of Governor Walker. Now I'm using pretty careful words there.
Okay.
Right? And it's a lot easier in a legislative process if you have the governor who has the bully pulpit and he can take the lead, and the legislators
Well, when
just
he was
come
running for
along.
president, he seemed to take credit for that right to work and said, that was
Well,
his idea and
there's a
his
few like that.
power.
I mean, another one that, and I've been kind of a behind-the-scenes guy, and that's how I like to operate, and I was pretty effective at it. One is the food stamp employment and training bill that we've got in Wisconsin. I wrote that bill, my first session, introduced it, and they said, well, this is going to cost money. I said, well, I know it's going to cost money. But instead of having able-bodied adults who could work, are able to work, and they're between the ages of 18 and 49, instead of them getting food stamps and sitting at home without a job, they need to either be in job training or get a job. Then you can get food stamps, and we'll provide the job training for you. And when I proposed it, I said this is going to be sort of like, you can give a man a fish and feed him for a day, or you can teach him to fish.
Right.
Let's help get some job skills that are meaningful in the marketplace today and help get employment. And the bill died my first term. But the second term, Governor Walker picked it up, put it in his budget. He's taken a lot of credit for it. He also ran for president on that, and he's doing a statewide tour on it right now. It's a fantastic idea. I loved it. Another one that I worked on behind the scenes, really my whole time there, was the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and I really felt like it was a mistake. I felt strongly that we should not have a state exchange, and without a lot of opposition, but I did carry that message. I have been sort of the Medicaid, they gave me the Medicaid portfolio. I don't know why. I was interested in it. And so I have worked on that. I think there was a time when I'm pretty sure we would have had a state exchange if I hadn't have been there. And I can tell you that I'm almost positive we'd have had Medicaid expansion if I hadn't have been there. Now, there are people out there that say, good, he's gone. Now we can do Medicaid expansion. Except that I think I've been proven right on the state exchange thing. It was a boondoggle to do. Every state that has done it probably wishes they had not done it.
Well, except for John Kasich in Ohio.
Well, he took the expansion, but the exchange is a different thing. And the expansion, part of the thing is you're taking federal money as if it's free money, number one. Federal money is not free money. That's also taxpayer money, and it isn't like there's an endless supply of it. We're borrowing that money. We've got a huge budget deficit. And the other thing is it's going to come home to roost. And now you're seeing state by state where they're starting to have budget troubles because they've put so many more people on there. We came up with a completely unique plan in Wisconsin that's worked very well for us. There is no gap in coverage. We're the only state that didn't take expansion and has no gap. We cover you with Medicaid up to the poverty line. over that, you're eligible for subsidized coverage through the federal exchange, which is the federal law of the land. So that was something that, and I've spent a lot of time, and it's been mostly behind the scenes time on the Medicaid issue. It is the single fastest growing area of our budget.
And that's
all the money is going into Medicaid. It's happening in every state. We as a nation have decided that Medicaid expansion is a thing. In the states like Wisconsin, we got to decide how much of that federal money we're going to take, but the federal budget is just getting blown up by Medicaid and by the Affordable Care Act. It's not a good deal. It's not a good deal for consumers. We could have done it better and still had consumer choice in there, and it's just a shame. But in Wisconsin, I think we're in good shape.
All right, so you've been in for 6 years, and on the lower taxes motto and getting the fiscal house in order. So what other areas for the person who's going to be taking your spot, and they're running, if they run on the same platform, where's all this government waste and excess spending that is going to be able to be cut after Dean Knudson has led the fight to cut the budget for the last 6 years? So where else can it be cut, that there's so much of this waste and fat on the budget?
It doesn't get easier. That's for sure. I think there will be emphasis on regulatory reform, because we really only scratched the surface on that. The stack of state regulations is huge. It's bigger than all the laws in the state. And so this is where, for the DNR, for example, they have rules about all sorts of different things. You've got try to open a business, try to build a building in Wisconsin, and we don't follow the Uniform Building Code in a lot of cases. People from Minnesota look at us sometimes and say, how do you guys even operate over here when it's like that? And we've been unable to get that completely streamlined and changed. So I think that'll be something to be worked on. We just barely scratched the surface on size of government, despite all the hue and cry about, oh boy, you guys are really cutting. You remember when Governor Doyle ran, he made a promise that out of there's 35,000 state employees and 35,000 UW employees. There's about 70,000 state employees altogether. And I can't remember, I think he promised that he'd cut 5,000 of them. Governor Walker's first term didn't cut any. Second term, flat. This term, we cut a couple hundred, maybe 300 or something, 300 or 400, which is barely 1%.
Well, when you say we, that would be the legislature. But if you hand UW River Falls, here's your budget.
Yep.
And we're not going to tell you who to cut or what to cut. Yep. And if they start firing people, is that included in your couple hundred estimate then, when they're starting to close programs?
No, I'm talking about in the 35,000 that are non-university employees.
Okay, all right.
At the university, it's been interesting. So we found the big surplus, and we encouraged them strongly to spread that around to your various campuses. Don't have a rigid fixed formula that says, look, because we don't determine how much money goes to each campus at the legislature. The governor and the legislature does not make that distinction. We give a block sum of money to the regions, and the regions decide where it goes. But they get in a system, and so always a certain percent went to UW-Madison, a certain percent went to each of the various campuses, and so on. And we said, look, some of these campuses are sitting on a huge chunk of money. You need to encourage them to use that by giving them a little less state support this time. Well, you'd think that the sky was falling. So Governor Walker proposed we should actually have less state funding. I fought against that, and we actually took a little bit out of that cut, but it was still a significant cut. And yet, budgets went up Almost every campus in the state saw their budget go up in the first year of the 2 years.
And which 2 years are we talking about now?
This current 2 years.
Okay.
This current budget.
So the 15-16 year, you're saying that they got an increase, and how about for 16-17, which we're about to enter?
It's going to go down. But you know what they did? So even in the year when their budget went up, they chose to implement the cuts that were going to be necessary in the second year. And this is what happened down at UW River Falls. They chose to make the cuts, and they did do some layoffs. In some cases, packages were constructed to get early retirement and so on, but I mean, there are fewer people on a lot of our campuses now. There are fewer people. And they chose to do that in the first year, a year in which they actually had plenty of money, more money than they'd had the year before. So now they made those cuts. Down at River Falls, they made the cuts in an environment where they actually had more money to spend. And so then what do you do with the leftover? They created a spending program for it. A new spending program. This is the craziest thing I'd ever heard. So they decided that, well, okay, we don't really like that there's a tuition freeze, but we're going to create a new scholarship program with this leftover money that we've got. So that's exactly what happened. That was because they were afraid of because we had wanted and they had asked for, could you construct it so that we don't have to make these personnel changes right away? We'd like to have a year to do it. So, give us more money in the first year and let the cuts happen in the second. But they voluntarily chose to do it in the first year and then have money left over. So I don't understand it. I'll tell you that our university system is something that the whole state ought to be proud of. It is fantastic. You know what? We have way more students come over here from Minnesota to go to college than go to college from Wisconsin to go to Minnesota. Stop and think about what that means. Okay? They can vote with their feet. There's reciprocity. It's not a matter of it's cheaper. They can vote with their feet. Why do they come here in greater numbers? Why? It's a simple reason. Our university system is a whole cut above Minnesota's. It's a whole cut above. And we're giving it away. I mean, to our in-state students, they get that.
So some would argue
bargain price.
Are we trying to bring us down to Minnesota's level then by starving the universities and cutting their budgets in the second year?
There's no sign that quality is going down.
If there's programs that are being eliminated,
no sign of that.
There's people that have majors. There's kids who have started majors. They're now sophomores, and now because of the cuts, they had to let go of faculty, and they can't offer the classes for those kids to be able to graduate in 4 years.
And I would challenge you to find me an example of that, because what you'll find is a lot of students who talk about this could mean it'll take me longer, but we haven't seen examples of that. Okay.
Well, this is just what I've heard. This is the
that
hue
is
and the cry.
It's a fantastic talking point. And it comes from the same students that before we instituted the tuition freeze, and they had year after year of 6% a year, they were crying and begging. They were camped out outside my office door when I joined the budget committee. They were camped out saying, don't make it a 6% raise this year. We can't handle any more than 4%, maybe even 3%. And then when we made it 0, you know what they were back protesting the next time? We got to have more tuition. We got to pay more tuition. There is no sense to that. There is no sense to that.
Well, I thank you for freezing it, because 2 of my kids benefited from the frozen tuition.
Right. And mine were already done and through, and so they didn't get any refund.
Well, you mentioned reciprocity. I mean, there's 2 different reciprocities. One is the universities and the students, and then the other is the tax reciprocity with the income tax, which is the bane of most
really
people
is.
who live on the border here.
I mean, it's my greatest regret of the time. I mean, I could look back and people say, well, what do you wish had gone differently, or what do you regret? One was the Milwaukee Bucks arena. I was just deeply, bitterly opposed to that. I fought as hard as you can possibly fight against it. It's the only bill of its kind that has passed our legislature. I don't know for how long. It passed...
Well, since the Brewer Stadium, Miller Park.
Well, maybe,
Yeah.
but I mean, there were some differences there.
Right. Yeah, a little bit economically,
A
yes.
little bit different. And, you know, I just don't believe it was good public policy. I still don't think so. That was one. And it's happening, you know, and you win some, you lose some. And, but another was reciprocity. And it was very frustrating because, you know, Minnesota asked us to make some changes.
We're talking about the tax reciprocity
income
specifically.
tax reciprocity.
Right.
For 30 years, we had reciprocity. You live in one state, work in the other, file one return. Simple. Worked great. We have reciprocity agreements like that in Wisconsin. We have them with all our other surrounding states, Michigan, Illinois. We have them as far away as Kentucky and Indiana, for goodness sakes. Minnesota has reciprocity agreements with Michigan and North Dakota and so on. But it fell apart over a dispute over the timing of when transfer payments would happen. And then, you know, we agreed to all the things. Then Minnesota asked for one more thing. They basically said, if we ever raise taxes, we want you to make us whole for all future tax increases. This is something that no state has ever asked of another state in a reciprocity agreement. Minnesota doesn't ask it of Michigan. They don't ask it of North Dakota. But they asked it of us, and they've insisted on it. And we've told them that is a non-starter. I mean, that will break every reciprocity agreement we've got because Illinois is going to want to do that and so on. And
So what will it take to bring Minnesota to
Minnesota
stop it?
legislature needs to come off that position.
But
I
what
think
will,
it'll
what will
be a
have to
new
happen?
governor.
Okay.
Okay, they did write it into their budget this last time, but then that portion of the budget was never passed. And they do their budget in little chunks.
Right.
And their tax portion of the budget never passed. They just went home without passing it. They can do that over there. And so, I mean, I think either you'll have a new governor over there. You know, we already got a new tax commissioner over there, and that helped a little bit. But the old tax commissioner, Myron Franz, moved up to be the budget director. And he loves that money that he's getting, and I don't think he's going to give it up and it's coming from his own people. That's the thing. I mean, they saw more tax revenue after reciprocity ended because they took sort of a government-centric approach, if you will, whereas we've taken a taxpayer-friendly approach. So it's very frustrating, and it's arcane. It's inside baseball. It costs people lots of money, extra time at tax season like this. If nothing else, a little bit of extra money and a lot of extra time and extra hassle. There are other families where it ends up hurting them quite a bit. And worse, there's small businesses that end up having to keep completely two separate sets of books. If you're a roofing company, I was having a roof replaced on a building I own today, and you know, it's somebody I know that the owners live in Hudson. It's a Minnesota-based roofing company, right? They do business across the river. Right. You got to keep two sets of books. You got to, you know, it didn't used to be that way.
Right.
And that's really a drain on productivity for the whole border region.
Right, and that argument is made at lots of levels for other areas like healthcare as well, is
right.
Charging different and having these rules where you can't just easily go across the border.
Absolutely.
So, all right, well, moving along, we've talked about the reciprocity, and you're confident the university system will be able to pull out of this funk. What do you see as far as future for that? Because you talk about the big pools of surplus of money. Now, I know a couple of people that are regents and so forth, and
yep.
They say that's partially true, but a lot of that money was already earmarked on 10-year and longer capital building plans.
It's true. It's true.
And so now that has affected a lot of those buildings that a lot of people were kind of counting on expecting to be built. Now they're kind of eating their seed corn, so to speak.
I don't buy that they're eating their seed corn. I mean, but I do think that whether it's in a household budget, whether it's in a small business, local governments, a never-ending gravy train of automatic increases that go on like that of multiple percentages every year, this just does not exist anywhere. I mean, really what they've gotten is a dose of reality. And I think that there's a good response. Ray Cross took over as president, and I think he really has handled this pretty well. It's difficult. He took over as new president of the UW system at a time that, the campuses were really in some turmoil over this for a variety of reasons. I mean, the faculty really overstated the impact, I think, that the tenure change was, and that's not helpful. But
Right.
they're a risk-averse group. They like to know exactly what's going to happen in the future, and
Right.
that's how it is. But I think Ray Cross has handled things well, and I suspect there will be an increase in funding for the UW system coming in this next budget. That's where we were 2 budgets ago, ready to do it.
Right. And what about the vocational schools and, our 2-year degree programs and so forth? Seems to be governors kind of drawing a distinction between the university system and our 2-year facilities, particularly with the degrees where they're more vocationally related.
Well, right. Now, we've got a vast system in Wisconsin, and there may be some duplication there. So we have 13 4-year colleges, and then we have 13 2-year colleges. Those are not the tech schools.
Right.
And then we have all the tech schools, which everywhere in the state there's a technical college. Here we're kind of perched on the border between Chippewa Valley Tech and the Indian Head Technical College. Both good systems, so we got the benefit of both. You can go to River Falls and go to Chippewa Valley. You can go up to New Richmond and go to Indian Head. And there's really good jobs. I mean, you can go there and get a 2-year degree and be just about certain of $50,000 or $60,000 a year coming out of there. I mean, you might go be a teacher and you might not make that for years. So, I mean, I think those fields and that form of education is something that, I think is too often overlooked by families and parents, and they just don't understand. Not every kid needs to go to get a 4-year degree, and some aren't that well suited to it, and they struggle trying to find a major and so on, which just adds to the cost. And then they come out and, it didn't lead to a certain job. Now, education is more than just a job. And there's a place for just training your mind and learning to learn and all of that. But there are a lot of jobs out there that need people. And so our technical system, we took it largely off the property tax. There's
Right.
property tax-based system, sort of like schools have been in Wisconsin, and technical colleges had been paid for through a levy on your local property tax, and yet very few people ever run into their technical college board member at the grocery store because they don't even know who that is. They know who their school board member is, but they don't know them. And so we just felt like it would be better to have it funded through state taxes, income taxes, and sales tax, more like the university system is. I think that's going to be healthier for them actually in the long run. And so that's key. I mean, I think you've got bipartisan consensus that the technical college system has an important role to play. Now, those 2-year colleges, I think there's more discussion there about, do we really need to have these 3 separate forms of education in a world when, hey, more can be done online and through the massive online, MOOC courses. And there's all kinds of technology and innovation that can help get those first 2 years of college credits out of the way if it isn't right for you to go to a 4-year campus. Arizona State's offering their whole first year now as an online thing. Anybody can do it. And if you don't pass the classes, you don't have to pay. So you could try those first-year courses over and over again until you pay. And I think that's where we're going to go. And Governor
But then you would
Walker's-
need fewer professors and there'd be fewer jobs.
Yes, there's change coming in education. There's just no doubt about it. The old paradigm and model of bricks and mortar and let's put these, 50 kids in a college class, oftentimes it's a pretty big lecture class, or 20 kids in a lab or something like that. I think you know
Being taught by an assistant instead of a professor. Yeah.
exactly. We need to look at, well, really, I know that evolved over time, and I enjoyed my years in college. My kids enjoyed their years in college, and they got a good education. But we need to be ready to say, look, let's not be rigidly fixed to that old paradigm. I mean, let's look at technology as it becomes available, and let's look at new models. Governor Walker's talked about things like, why does it need to take 4 years? Are there some ways that we could move towards actually making this happen in 3 years? And let's look at, technical proficiencies in certain areas.
So that's where our K-12 system and keeping that strong, because I know that Hudson is one of those
Definitely.
Top programs in the country for offering AP classes and getting kids graduated with college credits, and a lot of our
I
students
think
are
in Wisconsin,
starting as
our
sophomores.
K-12 integration into the 4 years is really pretty good. Like you say, there's AP. Some places have the International Baccalaureate program, and different advanced courses to really help kids. I think we could learn from Minnesota though in this in some ways as well. I mean, they've had tighter integration with K-12 into their technical colleges. We're working on trying to emulate that. They've had a little bit tighter integration in some ways in, for example, the senior year, letting you go take college courses at the college in the senior year, and then help the funding flow work so that it doesn't leave the K-12 system holding the bag or the university system holding the bag to say, look, here's a student that's going to get educated kind of to reach their potential. Minnesota's ahead of us in some ways in that integration between the systems.
So you don't see the future making education a second priority for the state?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't, but
Because it's the answer to this more jobs and better education. Those two kind of go hand in hand, don't they? I mean, you can make more jobs, like you said. There's more jobs out there in Wisconsin, it's just that we don't have the trained workforce to fill all those jobs.
But the bigger thing we need to do in Wisconsin is we need to think about the new economy and not leaving behind our manufacturing roots. We don't see this so much in the Hudson area necessarily, but when you get into the rest of the state of Wisconsin, we are a heavy manufacturing intensive state, dependent on that. Agriculture, manufacturing, tourism. But we've got to get into sort of the new economy, and you can see it around the Madison area, for example, where we've got biotech things happening. There's software companies that are really, really growing. New economy things. Minnesota here again has beaten us on this, and it started a generation ago when they got into medical devices and some other things, and they became a national hub for those industries. At the time that was going on, we were building things that now a lot of them are being built over in China because it's
Cheaper.
just done cheaper over
Yeah.
there. And you don't build those medical devices in China, they're built here. So we need to be building things that are cutting edge, where we're putting to work the skills and ingenuity. And for that reason, that's why I say college is more than just training for a job. College is sort of training your mind to be able to see opportunity and take advantage of opportunities. I'm a capitalist. I believe in free enterprise, and I believe that when people can see a need for something and see a problem, free enterprise means that they're going to come forward with a solution to that problem, but only if it makes sense for them to risk their time and their capital to go provide that solution. And so to
you
do
see
that, you've got to
innovation
have
happening.
kids that believe in that, and you've got to have kids that can think out of the box and say, hey, you know what, I could build a better mousetrap. I'm going to go do it. I bet I could get rich doing that.
Right.
And that lure of getting rich is really what drives our economy over time.
Okay. Well, I think we've touched on the things that you saw as maybe unfinished business and things that your successor might need to work on. Speaking of that, are you planning on endorsing a successor? There's already 2 people declared and circulating nomination papers on the Republican side, at least one on the Democrat
Yep.
side.
And I told both those candidates that I would help them both equally, provide advice, support, that I don't think I'll endorse, and I don't intend to. I think
Okay.
it's healthier for them to go out, campaign. Primary can be a healthy thing, as long as you don't beat each other up too much. When it comes to the end, hopefully whoever doesn't get the most votes can support the one who did get the most votes. And with that, it can be very good. I mean, oftentimes the candidate who wins coming out of a primary is way ahead in the general election because their campaign skills have been honed, they've
Right.
built their organization, and so I would just short circuit that by endorsing. There's no need to.
Okay. Then, what are Dean Knudson's future plans? We've got two different areas. Vocation, we know you had a very active veterinary practice before you went down to Madison, and I think that you've been continuing some of
I
that.
have been.
You haven't given up your license or anything like that?
Oh no, and so even while I was in Madison, I still worked almost always on Saturdays. Oftentimes I'd be home on Friday. Not much happens in Madison on Friday. It's not a Friday town.
Right.
And other times when I was available. And so I'm looking forward to having more time at home, more time here and not in Madison. I've had a job and a career where I was home. I don't travel for work. Some people travel. I've always been home. Joy and I have been married for 27 years and 28 years, I guess. And in that whole time, I got to do a little math there. In that whole time, the longest we'd ever been away from each other is maybe a week vacation one time when I was up in the Boundary Waters. And so, with me down there, there's a lot of that, just being away from Hudson. I love the area. I love being here. So
no
it'll be
plans
nice
on
to be
moving
home.
anywhere or retiring any place south where
Well,
it's
no,
warm?
retirement is in the plan, but this isn't retirement what I'm doing. I've been telling people I'm not retiring. I'm returning to the private sector where I'm going to work for several years so that I can retire in a few years.
Okay.
The salary for being a legislator is adequate. I would never complain about it. The pay in Wisconsin is more than most states, but it's not as much as you would make if I had been at home working all the time. And so there's a certain sacrifice to that. I had 2 kids go through college while I have been serving, and I need to kind of put my nose to the grindstone for
Right.
a while.
Oh, understood. Well, then so you got a day job, but then day job change coming up. How about the political? Because you said that you've been involved in politics for decades now.
I have been.
You've been to national conventions as a delegate before, and I understand very recently you were appointed to go to this year's.
Just yesterday, I found out officially that I was named a delegate, one of the at-large delegates for Wisconsin. And, the parties, as everyone has learned this year, the parties run that process. And of our 2 major parties, they each do it quite differently.
And state by state, they
And
do
also
different.
state by state. I mean, we believe in federalism, and we allow the states to come up with their own system of sending. Although there are national rules that you have to fit within, they're allowed a certain amount of flexibility. That's why you see Minnesota run a caucus system where it's literally run entirely by the parties. There's no
Much lower participation rate.
much lower participation. However, there's more discussion there, which has its advantages. But for example, when people come and it seems disorganized, like who's in charge here, because it's not the state election officials or the local election officials running it. Whereas in Wisconsin, we run a primary system. It's just like going to a regular election. We actually do it in conjunction with one of our official
And
elections.
Wisconsin is an open primary state where you don't have to be a declared or registered party member to be allowed to vote.
Correct. So we don't require party registration, and we allow you to cross over. However, you can only vote on one side. You can't do a little of this and a little of that. We had phenomenal turnout. we have 3.4 million registered voters in Wisconsin. We had 2.1 million of them participated in our presidential primary
In an
process.
April election, that's
Which is huge. State of New York, for example, is much bigger than us, and they didn't have anything near that kind of
Can you
turnout.
remember a time, though, where both parties' nomination process was in doubt by the time of Wisconsin?
It's been a long time.
And so I think that's what spurred a lot of interest. So we saw a very good local turnout. I know just within the school district, where we happened to be running a referendum at the same time, it was 12,000 people voted on the referendum. Now, I didn't count the votes to figure out how many voted in the presidential between the two parties, but I would imagine it was pretty close. I know for the other lower offices, such as school board, they get fewer number of votes. I mean, people were out voting for that. Right. Another example is the Supreme Court race. You had a lot more people voting for one of their presidential candidates than actually ended up voting in the Supreme Court race.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and some people don't pay attention to the lower races, just the fact.
So I think this is a subject for another show, so we got to kind of bring this to a halt. We've been going for about an hour here. I just wondered, that process, how did you put your name in to say that you were willing to do that? I know that it's a different process for the congressional district where you actually have to run and kind of campaign against other people. And then,
well, there is campaigning to be an at-large delegate as well. It's a little bit different kind of campaigning. I mean,
if you have name recognition like you have, it's a little bit easier then.
Well, so...
Plus you have a pedigree of having been to, how many conventions have you been to previously?
I mean, so the way that we do it is, I've been to 04 and 08 as an alternate both times.
Right.
Once as a district alternate, I was elected from the 3rd Congressional District as an alternate in 04. And then in 08, I was an at-large alternate.
So 3rd convention, first time it will be as a pledged delegate then?
Yes.
Okay.
And, right. So I can tell you the Republican side because I don't know the Democrat side as well.
Oh yeah, it's a
little
process.
different. They have super delegates and some different things, but ours is pretty simple. And a lot of states have this. You're going to see this in California, almost identical. You're going to see it in Indiana this coming week, very close to the same. We do 3 per congressional district. And they're bound. In Wisconsin, they're tightly bound. In other states, they're bound for just the first vote. Right. They're bound to vote the first time for whoever won the primary in that congressional district. And I was an early Cruz supporter. I was one of the earliest. When I contacted the campaign, there really was no Cruz campaign, and they didn't have anybody else. So I was among the first 2, put it that way. And I essentially helped recruit the rest of the Cruz organization here in Wisconsin, which included, working on getting endorsements from other legislative leaders, helping to recruit the state chair, who was State Senator Dewey Strobel. I recruited the speaker to do an endorsement, helped recruit the governor to do an endorsement, talk radio host to do an endorsement. I told the Cruz campaign how important talk radio was in Wisconsin over and over again, and so we really crafted what I called kind of a talk radio strategy in Wisconsin that ended up being somewhat the talk of the nation.
So it helped being on board with the Cruz campaign early helped get...
Well, the way we do on the Republican side, the way our Constitution reads is that the winning campaign gets to put forward a slate of delegates to the executive committee of the party, so the party officials. So the campaign gives a list to the party officials, and then they make their own list, and then they get their list approved by the campaign again. All in all, what it means is you have to be able to make the case that you would represent the state well, that you would represent that candidate well, and that you would represent the party well. And, so that's the case that I was making. We have 18 slots, 3 of which are predetermined, because every state has 2 national committee men, a man and a woman, and their state chair. So that's 3 are automatic. There are no selection. And then there's 15. And so that's what I was vying, was to become one of the 15. And so, you start off, the Governor Walker and the First Lady and the Lieutenant Governor and the Attorney General, and so on. So you get down the Speaker. So there's 5 out of the 15 already. So really I was vying to become one of about 10 spots. And so, yeah, I'm happy about it. I'm excited. Because I think this is going to be a real working campaign for us. Our party is at a bit of a crossroads, as I said.
Well, there's a bit of tumult right now
There is.
Going on, and you see, Wisconsin was touted as this momentum stopper for Trump, and then he turns around and does his 5-state sweep last night.
Well,
and so now
in New England.
In New England, understood.
In New England.
And these have become regional things about where
They
each
really
person
have, but
has
that isn't new. I mean, when you say it has become regional, I mean, you can go all the way back to, say, when Rockefeller, became part of the ticket. There has always been, it's a more moderate Republican up in the Northeast. There is about 0 chance that the Republicans will get any electoral votes out of any of those states, and yet we're letting them help choose who our candidate's going to be.
Right, but the delegates are kind of determined by the number of votes that the previous, isn't that like reallocated over
Every time, right?
Because there's some states where there's very few Democratic delegates awarded, but then states like New York get this huge amount. Plus,
Absolutely.
there's a little bit different system because the Democrats do about twice as many delegates as
Well,
the
there's
Republicans.
that.
Yeah, but okay, we
Yep.
talk about the momentum. So Indiana's coming up. And
Yep, Indiana and California, and they're both where you can win a congressional district and you get those 3 delegates. California's got a lot of.
But California's not till June.
California's in June.
Indiana's next week, first Tuesday in May. So do you
Right.
see that as kind of the watershed as far as whether the Republicans are going to have to get around Trump before the convention, or do you put percent chances on somebody not having 1230? Well, it's only Trump right now that has the only chance at 1237. So
Sure, I would say it's 50-50 right now whether he has it. I think Indiana makes all the difference.
and then the talking heads on the national program seem to say that when you say 50-50, then how close does he need to get, do you think, to have a chance? There's some say he's got 0% chance even if he's at 1236. Do you see that as the case because of the job that Cruz is doing, sweeping up all the uncommitted delegates? And
The grassroots has been coalescing around Cruz, and that has been a sharp trend. I mean, wherever you have a grassroots Republican worker who's been involved in the party for any length of time, I mean, they're coalescing around Cruz. And that might be for a variety of reasons. I mean, they feel like his issues and policies fit better with them. They feel like he's stronger in most of the polls against Hillary in the fall. I mean, there's a variety
between
of
those
reasons.
two, but the strongest is Kasich, and we haven't talked about him, and he's the one who keeps touting these polls, and they do. Every week another poll comes out showing that he does the best against either Hillary or Bernie Sanders, although Hillary, I think, is starting to pull away a little bit because of those super delegates.
Yeah.
Do
But
you see
He hasn't
Kasich?
won. I mean,
He's won Ohio, and he's finishing second now ahead of Cruz in these states. So
well, in some of those neighboring states, true.
right.
But
And so, what do you think about this pact, where that is the non-pact pact is what they started saying? Because when they asked Kasich, okay, are you going to tell your folks to vote for Cruz because that would be the essence of what you're trying to do is stop Trump. And then Kasich said, well, I'm not telling anybody how to vote. And so is the pact off, or is it just that he's not going to set foot in Indiana and pull his TV money and save it for New Mexico and Oregon, and Cruz is going to do vice versa?
yeah. Well, as we talked about earlier, campaigns cost money. I mean, it takes a lot of money, and it's hard to sustain a national campaign that goes state after state after state. And you saw in Wisconsin, we saw it here locally. Cruz campaign focuses on the grassroots. I mean, there's lots of door knocking, phone calling, the old time let's reach voters and try to talk with them about the issues and the candidates. Trump does a lot less of that.
No, he does.
Almost none.
He goes on CNN and MSNBC.
He's had a
and
lot of
Fox
free
Network.
media because
Yep.
he's had the personality and the ratings. They like ratings, and so there's that. And Kasich is somewhere in between. I mean, he really doesn't have much for organization. That's what let him continue as we went from 17 candidates to fewer and fewer. Is, you know, Governor Walker had a burn rate of, you know, $90,000 a day. He was going through money in his campaign. I mean, they had geared up a campaign they had salaries and people. I mean, his burn rate for money was such that it was unsustainable. And the problem is you can never go back. You're seeing that with Bernie Sanders now. He started laying off people this week because it's just not sustainable. And so that starts to create a narrative that you're going to fail, and it becomes self-fulfilling.
Right.
Well, the one way you can avoid that is never create any staff. And that's what Kasich did. I mean, he came in and he has, it's been a low budget shoestring thing. He went and did town
And
halls
his
here and
philosophy
there.
is just stay alive.
Stay
And if
alive.
he stays up in these polls, he's going to have an argument that he's the most
No,
winnable
he
candidate.
won't really. I mean, I don't get the logic of it. It's been a gift to Trump. I mean, what he will have ensured that Trump becomes a nominee. That's the only thing he will have ensured, because there were states where if he wouldn't have been involved anymore, clearly Missouri would have been winner take all, and it was just a few hundred votes. I mean, clearly Cruz would have won Missouri. So
Except Cruz is picking up a lot of those delegates in Missouri because of the way their
Some.
rules are
Yeah.
written.
So it's been interesting. I would say, you know, here's the futility of the Kasich campaign might be illustrated by this. Rubio's been dropped out now ever since Florida.
I was going to
And he
mention.
still has way more delegates than
Right,
Kasich.
he's up at around 174, 180, and Kasich's down around 147, 150.
Right. And there's no sign that that's going to change anytime soon. I mean, he'll
Yeah.
probably come to the convention with a greater say in what goes on, because he ran hard with a real organization in Iowa, and he ran hard with a real organization in some other states.
Kasich's going to have a pretty hard case to make if he's still fourth by the time you get to Cleveland. Agreed?
But
Even if he slightly gets above Rubio, you don't think it's going to change?
the thing that, and I can tell you from my own case, that not running again after 3 terms when you've reached a position of some influence and, you know, some little bit of power, if you will, some say over things. And it's very unusual to step back from that, because politics is full of people with egos. And you don't
Really?
get into it unless you have an ego. I mean, you have to just believe that I'm going to put myself out there. I believe I've got an idea, or I believe I can do this better than the other guy. If you don't do that, you won't last very long in politics. So you have to have a little ego. You also have to have a thick skin and a short memory.
Yep.
Because there's lots of slings and arrows and shots and stuff. And I mean, I have a very short memory and a pretty thick skin, and my skin has gotten a lot thicker. I think Trump needs to develop a little of that, you know, because what you've seen is that he when attacked, he can't just let anything slide off him.
Right.
And there's a certain point where you have to kind of rise above it. And I think for Kasich, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just,
Well, he's tried to
Can't be
portray
much more
himself
than
as taking
ego.
the high road the whole way. But
I mean, I would have thought he was running for vice president. In a normal year, he would have been running for vice president. At a certain point, he would have stepped
Right.
aside and said, hey, I gave it a good run. Everyone can see that I could be president. It just won't be now. And
right.
therefore,
and I've
I
got
should
something
be,
to offer as a running mate, right?
Right.
I haven't heard the news yet today, but Cruz was going to announce he was
Announced
going to
Carly
Fiorina.
Fiorina.
And that's a done deal then, right? Okay. Well, when do you go to Cleveland? When the convention is?
It's July 17th through the 21st, or 18th through the 21st. It's a Monday. It really starts on Saturday. Saturday and Sunday there are events, but then the work is happening. And
We already know then what's going to be dominating the news that week.
that week, right.
And this time, which one is first, Republicans or Democrats?
Republicans are first and Democrats are second, I think.
All right. So maybe after that convention, we could have you back and tell us about that experience?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dean, for coming on the show. And thank you, viewers, for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal.